My name is Lily, and I have spent the better part of my 24 years mastering the exhausting art of being invisible. To most people, silence is just a lack of noise, but for me, it is a sanctuary, a thick glass wall that I've built between myself and a world that is far too loud, far too fast, and far too demanding. I am the girl you see in the back of a coffee shop, hunched over a laptop with heavy noise-canceling headphones on, not because I'm listening to music, but because the mere hum of human conversation feels like a physical weight on my chest. I am the person who will walk 3 extra blocks to avoid passing a group of teenagers on the sidewalk, and I am the person who rehearses a simple hello in my head 20 times before I dare to say it to a cashier. My social anxiety isn't just a personality trait, it's a living, breathing entity that sits on my shoulders, whispering that every gaze is a judgment and every silence is a failure. I grew up in the misty, rain-drenched outskirts of Seattle, a landscape that perfectly matched the internal grayness of my soul. While other children were forming loud, chaotic tribes on the playground, I was the one tucked under the damp cedar trees, filling notebooks with stories about people who could fly away from their problems. My mother, a woman who spoke in whispers and smelled of lavender and old books, always said I was born without a protective layer. She understood that I felt everything, every sharp word, every cold look, every awkward pause, with a raw intensity that most people couldn't imagine. School was a series of tactical maneuvers designed to minimize my existence. I learned how to sit in the exact middle of the classroom where the teacher's eyes would naturally skip over me. I learned how to move through the hallways during the busiest times without bumping into a single soul. I was a ghost in a denim jacket, haunted by my own fear of being noticed. The defining moment of my childhood happened in the 8th grade. It was a mandatory drama class, a cruel joke played by the school board on children like me. We were each assigned a single line from a classical play to deliver on the stage. My line was simple: "The carriage has arrived, my lady." I spent an entire week in my bedroom, standing in front of my mirror until my eyes burned, practicing the rhythm and the breath. I knew the character. I had written a 10-page backstory for her in my mind. But when the day came and I stood under the blinding, yellow heat of the stage lights, the world vanished. I couldn't see the audience, only the terrifying void where their eyes should be. My throat closed up as if someone had cinched a wire around it. I stood there for 2 minutes, 120 seconds of pure, agonizing silence, my mouth opening and closing like a fish dying on the sand. The teacher finally told me to sit down, her voice a mixture of pity and annoyance. That was the day I realized that the world of performance, of standing in the light, was a country I would never be allowed to visit. I was a citizen of the shadows, and I accepted that fate with a heavy, silent heart. As I entered my early 20s, I discovered that while I couldn't speak, I could write with a ferocity that surprised even me. When I am typing, the wall between my brain and the world finally crumbles. I can write characters who are bold, witty, and unapologetically loud. I spent 2 years pouring my entire identity into a screenplay titled The Echo of Silence. It was a story about a woman named Claire who loses her voice after a tragedy and has to navigate a high society world that values noise above all else. It was my heart on paper. I sent it to an agency in Los Angeles, hoping for a low-level job as a reader. Instead, I got a call from Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a legend, a director whose films were studied in universities. He told me, in a voice that sounded like shifting gravel, that my script was the most honest piece of writing he had read in a decade. A week later, I was sitting in his office in a skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds. I was so nervous I had to sit on my hands to keep them from shaking visibly. Marcus talked about tonal shifts and narrative arcs, and I just nodded, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "Lily," he said, "I've auditioned 50 actresses for Claire. They all play it like a girl who is just a little shy. They don't get the bone-deep terror of being seen. But I see it in you. Every time you look away, you're playing the scene. I want you to play Claire. If you don't do it, this movie doesn't get made. I wanted to scream no. I wanted to run out of the building and never look back. But I looked at the script on his desk. Claire was me. If I let a Hollywood starlet turn her into a series of cute pouts and choreographed stammers, I would be betraying the only part of myself that felt real. I took a breath that felt like swallowing glass and whispered, okay. The first day of principal photography was a descent into a very specific kind of hell. I arrived at the studio at 4 a.m., the air cold and smelling of damp pavement. I was led into a massive trailer that was supposed to be my home for the next 3 months. It was filled with flowers I didn't want and mirrors I was afraid to look into. For 3 hours, a team of people I didn't know poked at my skin and hair as if I were a laboratory specimen. The lead makeup artist, Stella, was a human hurricane of energy. She talked incessantly about her ex-husband, her keto diet, and the latest celebrity gossip, all while brushing powders onto my face that felt like suffocating dust. I tried to respond with polite nods, but every time I opened my mouth, the words felt like they were stuck in a thick syrup. Stella probably thought I was a stuck-up diva, but in reality, I was just trying to remember how to breathe without hyperventilating. When I finally stepped out onto the set, the sheer scale of the operation made my knees buckle. It was a massive soundstage where they had reconstructed a perfect, vintage Seattle apartment, Claire's sanctuary. There were miles of thick, black cables snaking across the floor, giant HMI lights that felt like miniature suns, and at least 100 crew members moving with a chaotic, purposeful energy. Marcus Thorne walked over to me, his presence a calm, grounded anchor in the storm. He saw my wide, terrified eyes and put a hand on my shoulder. Lily, ignore the army. Ignore the glass. This is your world. You built these walls with your words. You are the only person here who truly knows what happens next. I wanted to believe him, but as I looked at the giant IMAX camera pointed at my face, I felt like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. My co-star was Julian Vance, a man whose face was a global currency. He was handsome in that effortless, irritating way that only movie stars are, and he moved with a confidence that felt like a physical affront to someone like me. He walked up to me, flashed a grin that had probably won him an Oscar, and said, "Hey, partner. Ready to set the world on fire?" I managed to let out a sound that was half squeak, half gasp, and immediately looked at the floor, praying for the earth to open up and swallow me whole. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the "who is this girl" expression that I had seen on 1,000 faces before. I was the shaking girl, the amateur, the girl who didn't belong in the light. The first scene was simple. Claire sitting at her desk, trying to write a letter while Julian's character stands in the doorway, watching her. No dialogue. Just being. Marcus called action, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. I could hear the hum of the lights, the whir of the camera, and the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. My hands began to shake, not just a little, but a violent, uncontrollable tremor that made the pen in my hand rattle against the desk like a drum. I tried to focus on the paper, but the lines were swimming. I dropped the pen, and it felt like a grenade going off in the quiet room. "Cut!" Marcus shouted. We tried again. And again. And again. By the 15th take, the air in the room felt heavy with the crew's silent frustration. I could see the camera assistants checking their watches. I could see the lighting techs whispering in the shadows. I was a failure. I was a $40 million mistake. During the lunch break, I didn't go to the catering tent. I ran back to my trailer, locked the door, and collapsed onto the floor of the tiny bathroom. I cried until my chest hurt, the kind of deep, racking sobs that come from realizing your greatest fear has finally come true. I was too small for this. I was a writer who had mistaken her imagination for courage. I pulled out my phone to call my mother and tell her I was taking a bus back to Seattle, but then I saw the script lying on the floor. It was open to a page I had written at 3 a.m. in a dark bedroom a year ago. The line read, Claire's fear is not a wall, it is her skin. She feels the world too much, and that is why she stays silent. I realized then that I was trying to act like a professional, someone poised and steady. But Claire wasn't poised. She was terrified. I didn't need to stop the shaking to be Claire. I just needed to let the camera see why I was shaking. I wiped my face, ignored the frantic knocking of the makeup artist, and walked back onto the set. I wasn't going to be a star. I was going to be the truth. The afternoon session started with a palpable tension. The crew was tired, the lighting was shifting, and I knew Marcus was under pressure from the studio to get the shot. He looked at me as I walked back onto the apartment set, and I didn't look away this time. I looked at him with all the raw, jagged edges of my anxiety exposed. He didn't say anything, he just signaled for the cameras to roll. This time, when Julian entered the doorway, I didn't try to steady my hands. I let them rattle. I let my breath come in short, shallow gasps. I didn't look at him, because Claire was a girl who used her peripheral vision to survive. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until it was painful. I felt the camera creeping closer, its glass eye inches from my face, capturing the micro-tremors of my lips and the way my eyes darted to the door, looking for an escape that wasn't there. When Marcus finally called cut, there was no shouting. There was a long, heavy silence that felt like it lasted an hour. Julian stood in the doorway, his usual mask of Hollywood charm completely gone. He looked genuinely shaken. "Lily," he whispered, "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never felt a scene like that." Marcus walked over, his face unreadable, and looked at the monitor. He played the playback in silence, watching the shaking girl turn her fear into a cinematic weapon. He turned to me and gave a slow, solemn nod. "That's the movie, Lily. Don't you dare change a thing." In that moment, the power dynamic on the set shifted. The crew stopped seeing me as a fragile amateur and started seeing me as a force of nature. But for me, the victory was internal. I had found a way to bridge the gap between my internal prison and the external world. As the weeks turned into months, the production moved from the controlled environment of the soundstage to the chaotic streets of Los Angeles. This was where my social anxiety became a tactical challenge. We had to film scenes in crowded parks, busy restaurants, and even a mock-up of a high-end gala. For a person who feels a spike of adrenaline when a stranger says, "Hello," being surrounded by 200 paid extras was a sensory nightmare. I developed a series of survival rituals. I wore heavy earplugs between takes to maintain my internal silence. I found dark corners of the set where I could sit alone and hum to myself to keep the panic at bay. I realized that the movie set was a microcosm of the world I feared, but here, I had a script. I had a purpose. I wasn't just Lily the shy girl, I was a storyteller, and every moment of discomfort was fuel for the fire. However, the industry began to close in on me. The studio executives started seeing the footage, and the buzz began to grow into a roar. They started sending publicists to the set, men and women who wore expensive suits and smiles that felt like plastic. One of them, a woman named Sarah, cornered me in the hair and makeup trailer. "Lily, honey," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "the dailies are incredible. The studio thinks you're the next big thing. We need to start building your brand. We want to do a series of candid Instagram videos. You know, you laughing with Julian, you showing us your favorite books, maybe a little tour of your trailer. The fans want to feel like they're your best friends." I felt the familiar, cold weight of dread settle in my stomach. They wanted me to perform Lily for the world, a performance that felt even more impossible than playing Claire. I can't, I whispered, staring at a bottle of hairspray. Sarah's eyes hardened for a split second before the smile returned. "It's part of the job, Lily. You're not just a writer anymore. You're an investment." That night, I sat on the floor of my hotel room, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. I felt like a bird in a golden cage, being told that I should be grateful for the bars. The next day's call sheet was the great speech scene, the climax where Claire finally speaks her truth in a room full of people who have spent their lives ignoring her. It was 6 pages of dialogue, a mountain of words for someone who struggled to order a pizza. I spent the entire night pacing the room, my voice hoarse as I repeated the lines. I was terrified that when the lights hit me and the 200 extras stared at me, I would revert to that 8th grade girl who couldn't say, "The carriage is waiting." I realized that this scene wasn't just a part of the movie, it was the fight of my life. I had to prove to myself that my voice had value, even if it was a voice that trembled. The morning of the great speech scene felt like the air was made of lead. The set was a grand, echoey ballroom, filled with nearly 300 extras in formal wear. The lights were blindingly bright, and the atmosphere was thick with the smell of floor wax, expensive perfume, and nervous energy. Marcus was unusually quiet, his eyes focused on the monitors. He knew that if I failed the scene, the entire emotional structure of the movie would collapse. I sat in a chair off to the side, my headphones on, playing a loop of a thunderstorm to drown out the chatter of the crowd. My hands were ice cold, and I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. I felt like I was walking toward an execution. Julian came over and sat next to me. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, providing a solid, calm presence. Then he leaned in and whispered, "I was terrified during my first 5 movies, Lily. I used to throw up in the bathroom before every take. People think I'm confident, but it's just a mask I've learned to wear. The fear never goes away, you just learn to dance with it. Don't try to be brave. Just be honest." I looked at him and saw the tiny lines of tension around his eyes. He was right. Everyone in this room was wearing a mask. The loud people, the confident people, the stars, they were all just trying to hide their own versions of the shaking girl. Marcus called for me, and I walked to the podium in the center of the ballroom. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked out at the sea of 300 faces, and for a terrifying second, the world went white. My ears started ringing, and I felt the familiar urge to turn and run out the back door, to go back to the gray rain of Seattle and never speak again. But then Marcus called action. I looked at the script in my mind. I thought about all the times I had been silenced, all the times I had been ignored because I was too quiet to be heard. I thought about the girl under the cedar tree who only felt safe in her notebooks. I started the speech. My voice was quiet, barely a whisper, forcing the microphones to strain to catch the sound. I stumbled over the first few words, my social anxiety manifesting as a genuine, unscripted struggle. I let the audience see the effort it took for me to speak. I let them see the tears of frustration and the way my lower lip trembled. As the speech progressed, my voice grew stronger, not louder, but deeper, with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. I wasn't delivering lines, I was stating a fact. When I reached the final line, "I may be quiet, but I am not empty," the ballroom was so still you could hear the heartbeat of the person next to you. When Marcus finally called cut, the extras didn't wait for instructions. They broke into a spontaneous, thunderous ovation that went on for 5 minutes. I walked off the podium, my legs shaking so hard I had to lean on the wall, and I knew in that moment that I had finally, truly, found my voice. The final weeks of filming were a blur of exhaustion and triumph. I was no longer the mystery girl to the crew, I was their lead. I found myself able to navigate the set with a new kind of ease. I still didn't like small talk, and I still ate my lunch alone in my trailer, but I no longer felt like an imposter. I had earned my place in the light. The last day on set was bittersweet. Marcus gave me a hug and a small, leather-bound notebook. "Write the next one, Lily," he said. "And remember, the world needs your silence as much as your words." As I drove away from the studio for the last time, I realized that my shyness hadn't gone away. It was still there, a quiet companion in my head, but it no longer had its hands around my throat. I was free. The post-production phase was a different kind of torture. Marcus invited me into the editing room to see some of the early cuts of the film. Watching myself on a 40-foot screen was an out-of-body experience. I didn't see Lily, the girl who is afraid of her own shadow. I saw a woman who was powerful precisely because of her vulnerability. I saw the way my silence created a space for the audience to feel their own emotions. The film was beautiful, a quiet masterpiece that felt like a long-held breath. But as the release date approached, the studio's marketing machine began to grind its gears. They wanted me to do a 10-city press tour. They wanted me on the late-night talk shows. They wanted me to be the introvert icon for a new generation. My publicist, Sarah, was relentless. Lily, you're the breakout star of the year. People are calling you the sovereign of silence. You have to give them something. If you don't go on these shows, the movie will fail at the box office. Do you want all that hard work to go to waste? The pressure was immense. I sat in a boardroom filled with men in expensive suits, my hands tucked under my thighs to hide the shaking. I waited for them to finish their speeches about market penetration and social media engagement. Then, I took a deep breath. The movie is about a woman finding her own way to communicate, I said, my voice steady for once. If I go on those shows and pretend to be an extrovert, I'm betraying the very thing we made. I will do the interviews, but I will do them my way. No live audiences. No funny segments. Just honest conversations about the work. To my surprise, the studio agreed. They realized that my shyness was actually my greatest marketing asset. We did a series of long-form, quiet interviews in libraries, botanical gardens, and quiet studios. I talked about social anxiety, about the struggle to find a voice in a loud world, and about why being quiet isn't a defect. The response was overwhelming. My inbox was flooded with messages from people who felt seen for the first time. I realized that by being honest about my limitations, I was actually opening a door for millions of others. I wasn't the shaking girl anymore. I was a witness. I was a lighthouse for the people who were lost in the noise. But then came the world premiere. The red carpet, the flashbulbs, the screaming fans. It was everything I had ever feared, amplified by 1,000. As the limo pulled up to the TCL Chinese Theater in Hollywood, I felt a wave of nausea so strong I thought I might faint. The noise from the fans was like a physical wall, a roar of Lily. Lily, that felt like it was tearing at my skin. I looked at Julian, who was sitting next to me, looking like a god in his tuxedo. He took my hand and squeezed it. It's just 30 yards, Lily. Focus on the door. Once we're inside, the world stops. Just 30 yards. I nodded, stepped out of the car, and was immediately blinded by 1,000 flashbulbs. I didn't try to be a star. I didn't do the glamorous poses or the playful winks to the camera. I walked quickly, my head tilted slightly, giving small, polite smiles to the photographers. I felt like I was moving through a storm, but I didn't let the wind knock me down. I made it to the lobby, my heart racing, my palms damp with sweat, but I had done it. I had survived the most public moment of my life. As I sat in the dark theater and watched the first frame of The Echo of Silence appear on the screen, I realized that I had finally found my place in the world. I wasn't an actress. I was a writer who had been brave enough to live her own story. And as the audience began to cry during the final scene, I knew that every moment of terror had been worth it. The success of the premiere was followed by a whirlwind of critical acclaim. The reviews called the film a landmark in modern cinema and praised my performance as a masterclass in quiet power. But for me, the real victory happened a few days later in a quiet coffee shop in Seattle. I was sitting in my usual corner, the one where I had written the script, when a young girl, probably no older than 17, approached me. She was trembling, her face flushed with the same kind of anxiety I knew so well. She didn't ask for an autograph or a photo. She just whispered, "Thank you for making me feel like I'm allowed to be here." We sat and talked for 20 minutes, two shy women in a world of noise, and that conversation meant more to me than any 5-star review or box office number. I realized that my success wasn't about fame or money, it was about connection. But fame is a strange and often cruel thing for an introvert. Suddenly, I was famous. People recognized me at the grocery store. They whispered when I walked into a room. My quiet life was under siege. Every time I left my apartment, I felt the eyes of the world on me. I started to retreat. I stopped going out. I stopped writing. The pressure to be the sovereign of silence became a new kind of cage. I felt like I had to be perfect, that I had to be the perfect representative for every shy person in the world. I fell into a deep slump of exhaustion and overstimulation. My agent was sending me scripts for massive blockbuster movies, superhero films, romantic comedies, but I couldn't even bring myself to open the envelopes. I felt like I had used up all my bravery points on the movie and I had nothing left for my real life. I spent weeks staring at the gray Seattle sky, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. I felt like an imposter who had accidentally stolen someone else's life. One afternoon, Marcus Thorne called me. He didn't talk about movies or business. He just said, "Lily, you're hiding again. And this time, you're hiding from yourself. You think that because you did something big, you have to keep doing bigger things. You don't. You just have to keep being honest. The world is always going to try to turn you into a product. Your job is to stay a person." I realized he was right. I had been so worried about managing my fame that I had forgotten to just be. I needed to reclaim my silence. I needed to find a way to live in the world without letting it consume me. I decided to take a break. I moved to a small, isolated cottage on the coast of Washington, away from the noise of Los Angeles and the expectations of the industry. I spent my days walking on the beach, listening to the waves, and slowly, very slowly, I started to write again. Not for a studio and not for an audience. Just for me. I realized that my shyness was like the tide, it would always come and go, and I just had to learn how to build my house on the right ground. I started a new script, a story about a lighthouse keeper who talks to the birds. It was small, quiet, and perfectly me. I realized that I didn't need to be a movie star to be happy. I just needed to be a writer who wasn't afraid to be seen every now and then. Living by the ocean changed the rhythm of my soul. In the city, the noise was constant, a jagged wall of sound that kept my nervous system on high alert. Here, the noise was organic, the wind, the gulls, the crashing water. It was a language I understood. I began to realize that my social anxiety wasn't a glitch in my personality. It was an oversensitivity to the artificial. I wasn't broken, I was just calibrated for a different frequency. I spent months in that cottage, finishing my new script and rediscovering the girl I was before the lights of Hollywood tried to rewrite me. I started to enjoy my own company again, without the weight of expectation. I was finally at peace with my silence. The peace of the coast was interrupted by the arrival of the awards season. The Echo of Silence was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Original Screenplay and Best Actress. My agent was ecstatic, calling me 10 times a day to discuss strategy and campaigning. The studio sent a mountain of gold-embossed invitations to luncheons, galas, and parties. They wanted the sovereign of silence to show up and play her role. The thought of it made my heart hammer against my ribs. I wanted to stay in my cottage. I wanted to watch the winter storms roll in over the Pacific and ignore the rest of the world. I felt the familiar, cold weight of dread settling in my chest. I called Marcus. "I don't think I can do the Oscars, Marcus. I'm not an actress. I'm just a writer who got lucky. I can't stand on that stage in front of a billion people. I'll break. I'll freeze like I did in the 8th grade, and this time, the whole world will see it." Marcus was quiet for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the phone line. Then he said, "Lily, you're right. You are a writer. And as a writer, you know that every story needs an ending. This isn't about the gold statue. It's about finishing the journey you started when you stood on that podium in the movie. You owe it to the girl in the coffee shop. You owe it to every person who feels like they don't have a place in the light. You are their voice now." His words hit me with the weight of a physical responsibility. I realized that my fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. If I stayed in my cottage, I was saying that fear is more powerful than the work. I was saying that shy people should stay in the shadows forever. I had to go. The night of the Academy Awards was a fevered dream of silk and diamonds. I wore a simple black dress that felt like a suit of armor. The red carpet was a war zone, but I moved through it like a ghost, barely stopping for the cameras. I didn't stop for the gossip reporters or the fashion critics. I focused on the gold doors of the Dolby Theater. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and egos. As the ceremony progressed, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer the shaking girl. I was a woman who had earned her place in this room. When my category, Best Original Screenplay, was called, my heart was pounding, but it wasn't the pounding of panic. It was the pounding of excitement. The presenter opened the envelope and said my name. I stood up, my legs feeling solid and strong, and walked toward the stage. I looked out at the sea of famous faces, the bright lights, and the millions of people watching through the cameras. I felt the panic trying to take hold at the edges of my vision, but I pushed it back. I looked at the golden statue in my hand, and I thought about the girl under the cedar tree. I stood at the microphone, the silence of the theater feeling like a living thing. I didn't look at the teleprompter. I looked straight into the camera lens. I wrote this story because I didn't have a voice, I said, my voice clear and steady. I spent my life believing that being quiet was a failure. But I was wrong. Silence isn't the absence of strength, it's the cradle of it. To everyone out there who is afraid to be heard, your quietness is not a cage. It's a superpower. Don't let the world make you loud just to make them comfortable. Stay quiet, stay honest, and stay brave. As I walked off the stage, I knew that I had finally finished my story. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever written. After the Oscars, the world expected me to become a superstar. But instead, I did the opposite. I moved back to my cottage on the coast and started a small publishing house for quiet voices. I wanted to find other ghosts like me, people who had brilliant stories to tell but were too afraid to stand in the light. I realized that my success wasn't about the golden statue sitting on my mantle. It was about the freedom I had earned to be exactly who I am. I still get nervous when the delivery guy knocks on the door. I still avoid making phone calls. I still feel a spike of anxiety in crowded rooms. But I'm no longer ashamed of it. I've learned to live with my anxiety like a roommate. Sometimes it's loud and annoying, but it's part of the house. 1 year later, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun set over the Pacific, when Julian Vance came to visit. He looked different, more relaxed, less produced. He told me that my speech had changed the way he looked at his own life. He had stopped taking roles that were just about being a star and started looking for stories that were honest. "You taught me that the most powerful thing you can do is be vulnerable, Lily," he said. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the waves. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who don't feel the need to fill the air with noise. I realized that I had found a new kind of friendship, one based on understanding instead of performance. My publishing house, The Quiet Press, became a success in its own right. We published stories about introverts, about people with social anxiety, about the observers of the world. We became a sanctuary for the people who felt like they didn't belong in the loud, fast world of modern publishing. Every time I edited a new manuscript, I felt like I was helping someone else find their voice. I realized that my journey from this shaking girl to an Oscar winner wasn't just about me. It was about creating a path for others. I was no longer a ghost. I was a guide. I started writing my third screenplay, a story about a girl who discovers she can talk to the shadows. It was a fantasy story, but it was rooted in the reality of my own experience. Marcus Thorne was already interested in directing it, but this time, I made sure the contract was different. No press tours. No live interviews. No red carpets. I had learned how to protect my peace. I realized that you can be successful without sacrificing your soul to the noise. You can be a part of the world without being consumed by it. I was finally, truly in control of my own narrative. As I look back on my journey, I realized that my social anxiety was never the enemy. It was the thing that forced me to look closer, to feel deeper, and to write better. It was the thing that made me a storyteller. Without the fear, I wouldn't have the empathy. Without the silence, I wouldn't have the words. I am grateful for the shaking girl I used to be, because she led me to the woman I am today. I am Lily, and I am quiet, and I am finally at home in my own skin. The world may be loud, but I have found my own rhythm, and it is more than enough. The legacy of The Echo of Silence continued to grow in ways I never anticipated. It became a staple in film schools and psychology classes, a case study in how to portray mental health with dignity and grace. But for me, the most important impact was the quiet movement that started to spring up. People began hosting silent book clubs and quiet cafes, spaces where introverts could exist without the pressure of social performance. I felt a deep sense of pride knowing that my story had helped create a more compassionate world for people like me. I wasn't just a writer anymore. I was part of a shift in the cultural landscape. I spent my days in the cottage, surrounded by books and the sound of the ocean. I had a small vegetable garden that I tended to with the same care I gave my scripts. There is something profoundly healing about working with the earth, about seeing something grow from a tiny seed into something strong and vibrant. It reminded me of my own journey. I had started as a tiny, fearful seed, hidden away in the dark, and I had grown into someone who could stand in the sun. I realized that growth isn't about becoming something different, it's about becoming more of who you already are. Julian and I started working on a project together, a small, independent film about two people who communicate through letters. No big budgets, no special effects, just two human beings trying to find a connection in a lonely world. It was the most fulfilling work I had ever done. We filmed it in a small town in Oregon, away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. The crew was small, and we all became like a family. I realized that this was what I wanted my life to be, a series of small, honest moments with people I cared about. I didn't need the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, I just needed the work. One evening, as I was walking on the beach, I saw a young boy sitting on the rocks, looking out at the ocean. He was alone, and he had a notebook in his hand. I didn't say anything, but as I walked past, I gave him a small, knowing smile. He smiled back, a shy, hesitant smile that reminded me of myself at that age. I realized that the cycle was continuing. There would always be the quiet ones, the observers, the ghosts. And as long as there were people like me to tell their stories, they would never truly be alone. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for my life, even the parts that had been painful. Every stumble had led me to this moment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. I stood at the water's edge, the cold Pacific waves washing over my feet. I felt a deep, unshakable peace. I was no longer afraid of the future. I knew that whatever challenges came my way, I had the strength to face them. I had found my voice, and I had found my place in the world. I was Lily, the girl who used to be afraid of her own shadow, and I was finally standing in the light on my own terms. The silence wasn't a cage anymore, it was my home. And it was beautiful. Now, as I sit at my desk in the cottage, the only sound the rhythmic scratch of my pen on the paper and the distant roar of the ocean, I realize that I finally found the true ending to my story. It's not about the awards, the fame, or the success. It's about the quiet moments of connection, the letter from a fan, the conversation with a shy child, the shared silence with a friend. These are the things that truly matter. I have learned that you don't need to be loud to change the world, you just need to be true. My voice may still tremble from time to time, but it is my voice, and I will never let anyone take it away from me again. I am currently finishing the final draft of my new screenplay. It's the most personal thing I've ever written, a story about a girl who learns to dance in the rain. I know that when it's finished, the world will want me to stand in the light again. And this time, I'll be ready. I'll walk onto the red carpets and the stages not as a victim of my anxiety, but as its master. I'll speak my truth, even if my voice shakes. Because I know that on the other side of that fear is a world of people who are waiting to be heard. I am no longer just telling my story, I am telling theirs. I look at the photo of the shaking girl from the 8th grade play that I keep on my desk. I don't look at her with pity anymore. I look at her with respect. She was the one who survived the silence. She was the one who kept writing, even when she couldn't speak. She is the foundation of everything I am today. I whisper a quiet thank you to her, and then I turn back to my work. The world is waiting for the next story, and I have so much more to say. The shadows have taught me everything I know about the light, and I am finally ready to share it. My name is Lily, and I am a writer. I am quiet, I am sensitive, and I am powerful. I am a ghost who learned to haunt the world with beauty. I am a witness to the unspoken. I am the sovereign of silence, and I am finally, truly free. As the stars begin to appear over the ocean, I feel a sense of limitless possibility. The world is loud, yes, but my silence is deeper. And in that silence, I have found my soul. The carriage has arrived, and this time, I am the one driving it. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm just being. And that is more than enough.